As the U.S. achieves its goals within its own land, ending Reconstruction, claiming the lands of the Native Americans, it's important to remember Frederick Jackson Turner's thesis from 1893, when he says that the existence of an area of free land, its continuous recession, and the advance of American settlement westward explain American development. In fact, he's saying that there is no American identity without that drive to expand. The fact is, the U.S. is on the world stage, showing off its technological and intellectual advancements. At the World's Columbian Exposition at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, the United States finally gets to show off that not only are they rejoined as a nation for those doubting European nations, but they're actually doing better. And despite Turner's thesis, the newly acquired Alaska from Russia is yet another success for the United States on the world stage. So we have a juxtaposition of this gorgeous, expansive frontier wilderness and the jam-packed eastern cities especially that are riddled with disease, with problems of immigration, with industrial pollution, and further problems that are similar to some of the problems that you'll see in Europe at this time as well. Yes, people are working hard and living in destitute poverty. This is not unlike the situation in industrialized Europe. Following the European revolutions of 1848, Marx and Engels produced the Communist Manifesto, which basically looks at wage slavery in factories and says the proletariat, or the working class, is going to rise up in violent revolution and become the ruling class. And there's going to be a cycle of violent revolution. Well, in Europe, people don't have a lot of places to go. They're really stuck in this problem, and a lot of people are getting poorer as a few people get richer, and the Communist Manifesto starts to sound good to them. Also in Europe is the centralization of powers, and we have a triple alliance joined in 1882. This is not to say that World War I is starting, but everybody is aware of alliances and imperialism, and the United States is not isolated from that, although they definitely are insulated by the two oceans. And they're starting to think even further about national security. Now, the Chinese were recruited to come to the United States to work, but as the railways become completed, they're not Christian, they're not white, they're not wanted by much of America. This complicates politics with China at this point, and the U.S. then decides that they will work with Japan and help them modernize. As the U.S. becomes further interested in trade in Asia, there are already a lot of businessmen and entrepreneurs and plantation owners in Hawaii. Strategically, Hawaii is about halfway to Asia, and it would be a great colony, perhaps, for the United States to be able to establish a presence in the Pacific. There was much talk for many years about the possibility of annexing Hawaii. A lot of white businessmen wanted this to happen. They continued to politic through the Committee of Safety, and eventually in 1893 overthrew Queen Liliuokalani. She was a good queen, and she decided that it was better to step down and save many lives of Hawaiians than to fight this battle. And thus Hawaii became a territory of the United States until the 1850s. The timeline for this is a little bit tricky. The actual annexation didn't happen until something else happened off the coast of Cuba. The USS Maine, a battleship that was outside of Cuba, blew up. And everyone wanted to blame Spain, which was trying to hold on to Cuba as an acquisition, as the Cubans were working for a long time to fight for their own independence. The Monroe Doctrine of 1823 set the precedent that the United States would react if they saw a threat from European nations in the Western Hemisphere. So here we have future President Teddy Roosevelt, who's the Secretary of War, carrying this around like he's a boy at play. And that's basically what he seems to have been in this 3.5-month war in Cuba. Two really famous journalists, William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer, sensationalized the war through something we call yellow journalism. And it was jingoistic, and it overblew some of the problems so as to convince the American populace that war was necessary. So they drew pictures of emaciated children and blamed it on the Spanish. And yeah, the Spanish were occupying Cuba. That's not good. But they also didn't blow up the Maine. Nor did the Chinese, as many people wanted to accuse them of, as there were some Chinese workers in the kitchen part of the Maine. Turns out that it seemed to have blown up itself, and then we went to war, and not just in Cuba. The Philippines were also a Spanish acquisition. The Americans have already taken Hawaii, and thus the Philippine-American War. Commander George Dewey leads the battle at Manila Bay in 1898 and wins. But the Americans stay, and in the early 19th century, they attack a group at the top of a volcano who are basically 900 unarmed people, and they massacre them, and it's absolutely horrifying. The Moro Massacre shocked the nation in 1906. Mark Twain was a huge advocate against these actions and for showing empathy towards these people. In response to the news about this massacre, he says, "They were mere naked savages, and yet there's a sort of pathos about it. When that word children falls under your eye, for it always brings before us our perfectest symbol of innocence and helplessness, and by help of its death, eloquence, color, creed, and nationality vanish away, and we see only that they are children, merely children. And if they are frightened and crying and in trouble, our pity goes out to them by natural impulse. We see a picture, we see the small forms, we see the terrific faces, we see the tears, we see the small hands clinging in supplication to the mother. But we do not see those children that we are speaking about. We see in their places the little creatures whom we know and love." And he is sarcastically admonishing America for having this double standard, despite the fact that it is so obviously terrifying.